If you want talk, games, and fun all rolled into one, well, you've come to the right place. This is The Game Show, where host Bradley Clarke and his special guests talk about the world of television game and competition shows. But Bradley's guests aren't here to just talk. They came to play a game as well. What will today's topic be? What game does Bradley have planned? There's only one way to find out.
It's time to start the show.
You heard the man. Welcome to The Game Show. And here's your host, the Bradster himself, Bradley Clarke.
And away we go. Thank you so much, Austin Angelo, for your delightful introduction, and welcome everybody to The Game Show, the talk show all about the world of television game and competition shows. I'm Bradley Clarke, and today is a real treat for me because my special guest is not just a game show producer. He is a game show super producer. Over his incredible career, this guy has worked on a countless number of shows in which his titles have ranged from consulting producer to executive producer to executive in charge to creator. And here are just some of the shows his game show talents have graced.
You can win $32,000 on the turn of a card on Card Shark. And if you play your cards right, you can win this beautiful car. And now, the host of Card Shark, Bob Boden.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Card Shark.
Tonight, we're playing the games you love to play with your family in a whole new way. Yahtzee, Twister, Cranium, Gestures, and Boggle. The games are bigger, the stakes are larger, and moments are priceless. Right now on Family Game Night. And now, here's your host, Todd Newton.
Thank you so much, Rick Richardson. Thank you all. How you doing, buddy? Thank you all for coming. Hi there, cuteness. Hi, guys. Good to see you. And welcome to all of you, especially you folks at home. We're thrilled to have you here on Family Game Night. This is where all of your favorite games come to life in every single episode.
Today on Funny You Should Ask, John Lovitz, Raven Simone, Louis Anderson, Byron Allen, Jody Miller, Maz Jobrani, and here's our host, John Kelly.
That's what I'm talking about. Welcome, everybody, to Funny You Should Ask, the show where every question has a funny answer. Won't you please put your hands together one more time for these rock stars of comedy right here.
But the list goes on to include such shows as Pressure Luck, Match Game, Whammy, Boom, and many others. Joining me on the line is a man whose work I've admired for many, many years, and I'm glad I finally get the chance to talk with him about his career today. Here he is, TV Bob himself, Bob Boden. Bob, welcome to The Game Show.
Thank you, Bradley.
It is such a thrill to have you on the show today. I mean, I've practically grown up watching almost all of the stuff that you have produced in the world of game shows. So for me to talk with you today is truly an honor.
Oh, well, I really appreciate that.
This is going to be so much fun. So we're going to take an exciting trip down game show memory lane with you. And I want to get right into the discussion. But before I do that, I always like to give a teaser for the game of the day that you'll be playing later on in the show. And Bob, for your game, the tease is that it's going to be a 2-for-1 revival. That's all I'm going to say.
Okay.
So, Bob, are you ready to talk game shows with me?
I can't wait.
Then let's get into it. So I always like to start off by asking my guests, especially since they're in the game show industry, how did you first become interested in game shows? Did you grow up watching them and that's where your passion for the genre started?
Yes. My love for game shows started at the age of 6. I had been a fan of television since as far back as I can remember. And I remember watching game shows very early in my childhood. And I realized, since I grew up in New York and there were many shows taping at that time in New York, I realized that I could go see an audience taping of a game show. And I checked out the shows that were in town at the time, and I realized that the minimum age to see most of the shows was 6. So as soon as I turned 6, I asked my parents if they would take me to see Password. That was one of my favorites at the time. So at the age of 6, my mom took me to see Password, And that is definitely the day that the light went on for me, that this is what I wanted to do when I grew up. I hadn't seen much color television at that time. Most of it was still in black and white. So to see the password set in brilliant color in front of me was quite impressive. And on top of that, we were sitting in the balcony at the Ed Sullivan Theater, as it's called now. Well, it wasn't then because the Ed Sullivan Show is still on. And I remember in the balcony, they had this enormous television monitor. And that was in vivid color, too, showing what was happening on stage because the eye line from the balcony was not all that good. So they put up this enormous screen, and I thought, wow, this is the biggest TV I've ever seen in my life. So between the big TV and the color set and the gameplay, which captivated me as far back as I can remember, that was the day that it all started for me.
And as you mentioned, you grew up in New York just like myself. So, Bob, welcome back to the New York airwaves.
Oh, thank you.
Coming from experience as a young New Yorker who was deeply into game shows, did a lot of your friends enjoy that passion as well, television, and did you play games with them?
Yes, I tended to hang out with other kids who shared my passion, as most kids do. And I do remember playing a lot of board games with my parents in elementary school and in junior high. On the first day of high school, I was in French class, and the kid sitting in front of me, a guy named Steve, he turned around to me before class started, and he said, "Hey, can you help me with the jumble in the newspaper? I'm stuck on a word." And so I helped him with the jumble, and we started talking and realized that we both loved game shows. So Steve and I became best friends, and to this day, almost 45 years later, we're still best friends. He's moved out to L.A. now. And we then started to recruit other friends into our little game show cult. And before you knew it, we had a club in our high school called the TV Club. And the purpose of the TV Club was to go as a group to tapings of game shows. And at the time, there were quite a few of them in New York. So we became regulars during non-school hours, of course, at various shows. And in the summer, either my parents or my friends and I would go to many shows. And ultimately, I would go without parents, and my friends and I would just hang out. We saw so many shows. It was a real, real delight.
I'm very curious now. What are some of the shows that you saw?
We saw the original Jeopardy with Art Fleming, I Guess, Three on a Match, Jackpot. One of my favorites, the $10,000 Pyramid, which became the $20,000 Pyramid, and for a brief time, the $50,000 Pyramid, and the $25,000 Pyramid, the nighttime version with Bill Cullen. The Big Showdown, Money Maze, Pass the Buck. Oh, gosh, so many shows, pilots, a lot of pilots for new game shows. Basically anything that was at NBC Studios in Rockefeller Center or CBS. They had several studios, but the main one was the Ed Sullivan Theater, as it's called now, on Broadway. And ABC did most of their shows at what was the Elysee Theater on 58th Street, which is now gone. But that's where I spent most of my summer, was going to see these shows. Lots and lots of them. I probably forgot half of them. Sale of the Century, Joe Garagiola's Memory Game, Concentration. You name a show, I probably went to see it. What's My Line? To Tell the Truth, I've Got a Secret. All those shows. I saw all of them. And a few other non-game shows, too. The Ed Sullivan Show and variety shows, things like that. But my love was the game shows.
Last year, I went to a taping of Late Night with Seth Meyers, which is filmed in the same studio that the original Art Fleming Jeopardy was filmed in for 11 years. And there is a Merv Griffin photo outside of the studio doors. So I went to the taping with a friend of mine, and she basically heard a whole history lesson from me about the studio and where each of the Jeopardy podiums were back in the day and what other game shows filmed in that studio. Actually, Seth Meyers, when he came out before the show, he said, "Oh, the original Jeopardy was filmed there." I think I was the only person who actually clapped for that, but it shows you what shows I appreciate. So you eventually made your way to the West Coast to study theater arts at UCLA, correct?
Correct. And it's not a coincidence that the game shows were moving to the West Coast. One by one, most of the production companies were resettling or settling anew in L.A., and I realized if I was going to follow my passion, I had to go to L.A.
And then in 1981, this is so fascinating, you appeared on The Dating Game as Bachelor number 3.
Yes, I did. Not my finest moment. It was a dare, in college, there were a bunch of guys on my dorm floor, and we all sort of competed to see who could get on the dating game. And three of us, including me, we got on. And there are days I find it amusing, and there are days I find it embarrassing. But that was my first appearance.
What was it like just being on the stage with Jim Lang?
Well, it was amazing just to be on the other side of the lights and to be a part of the show, even though I was clearly very awkward in what I was saying. It was an absolute thrill. I didn't win the date, but that's okay.
It's the experience that counts.
Yes, indeed.
So how did you jumpstart your career into professional game shows? Did the dating game ever lead anywhere in terms of getting a call? Because I know you mentioned that you wanted to be in the game show industry on the dating game.
I don't think the dating game itself really led to any professional pursuits. But when I got to LA, I started up my old habit again of going to tapings, and I was a regular at as many shows as I possibly could see. The first show I went to see in LA was Match Game. They shot primarily on weekends. And if there was a school day that ended early and I didn't have work obligations, I would find a taping of a game show to go to. And I just sort of hung out there. And, you know, in those days, there was less security. And if you were in the audience, you could usually hang out, or I would find my way down to the stage somehow and just talk to people and introduce myself and tell them what a fan I was. I read an article in TV Guide about The Price is Right, and it mentioned Roger Dobkowitz, who was the producer of the show at the time. And I sent Roger a letter. And I said, I'm a fan of game shows. I knew that Roger had written his college thesis on game shows, so I thought maybe he would appreciate my passion. And he wrote back, and we started a conversation. I eventually called him and met up with him, and that led to an internship in my last quarter at UCLA on The Price is Right. And that was a thrill beyond thrills. In fact, they didn't even know what an intern was back then. I had to teach them. And I called, and I explained that I work for them for free and get school credit. And they thought, oh, that's good, free labor. So I got hired there. It took me about 6 months of calling, actually, to get that, but it was worth every call. And then I was, in a very small way, I was in the industry. I was part of the business. I also had started a job in my sophomore year at UCLA as a cue card boy. And I was working for a wonderful man named Barney McNulty, who actually invented cue cards. And I would do whatever Barney assigned me to do. And there were a few game shows in the mix, not all that many, but I did a lot of live variety shows and big specials and sitcoms and commercials and parades. And I got amazing experience. One of my favorite shows to do was a show called Real People, which arguably was the first reality show. And that was a thrill. So I was working on Real People, and Real People was all about people who had unusual passions and unique accomplishments. So I had a dorm room at UCLA, which was decorated with television tickets to different tapings of shows. So I took pictures of my wall, and I brought it in, and I showed it to the producers and pitched myself as a story on Real People. Here's a college kid who's really into game shows. And sure enough, they liked my story. They did about a 4-minute piece on me that aired on the show in 1981. And that let the world know that I existed and was a game show fan, and that helped me get some attention. I would show that video to people when I could to show them that I was serious and had great interest. So between the cue cards and the Real People and my other internship, which was as a research assistant at CBS in the research department, I had access to a lot of studio lots, a lot of shows when they were taping. I was doing a lot of cue card work at NBC in Burbank. So when I wasn't working on the Days of Our Lives set, I would wander over and watch tapings of, you name it, Hollywood Squares, The Gong Show, everything they did there. And I worked on pilots, and eventually my first PA job was on a pilot for NBC Daytime called Temptation, which was hosted by Jed Allen, who just passed away a little while ago. So I just kept hitting the pavement and called up everybody I knew who did this, and eventually built a network of supporters who were producers. I got to know Jay Wolpert and Mark Maxwell Smith and Ralph Andrews and people like that. Susan Simons, who was a director of daytime programming at NBC, and Michael Brockman, who was head of daytime for CBS, who later wound up being my boss. I just was out there every day. I didn't know any limits. My first professional job was at Paramount Studios in the research department, which I had gotten by way of my internship at CBS. That's how I learned about research and ratings and data collection and analysis and all that. And lo and behold, the wonderful gentleman who I worked with, Tom Watson, who was manager of national research, he left CBS to go work for Lucille Ball. And there was an opening at CBS. And he called me and he said, hey, would you like to interview for my job? So I did, and I was selected to become manager of research. And now I'm working at Television City every day. I was fortunate enough to get selected. I was in the last class of 3 people who went through a year of training in all the different areas of programming. And at the end of that year, they said, what department do you want to work in? And whatever answer you gave, they created a job for you. So I, of course, said daytime. And I wound up being a program executive in daytime, working for Michael Brockman. And I became the network liaison to various shows, in addition to taking pitches for new ideas and working with the team at CBS, Television City, and Daytime. The first show I was the exec on was Press Your Luck, which was still a pretty new show at the time. And then I was given the $25,000 Pyramid, which was a real dream come true because that's the show that I visited most frequently when I was growing up. So here I am now working directly with the production team and with Dick Clark, who became an amazing influence in my career and my life. And I worked very closely with the folks at The Price is Right, which was exciting because I had been an intern there 2 years earlier, whether it was pilots or series, Card Sharks, a brief run show called Blackout. And I left the network just before Family Feud came back with Ray Combs, but I was there for the pilot of that. And we did several other pilots when I was there. So I got my fill of game shows. It was truly, truly amazing.
And not just any game shows, some of the best to ever be created and air.
Oh, indeed.
So 3 of the shows you just mentioned, Press Your Luck, Pyramid, and Card Sharks, are currently part of ABC's game show revival boom called Summer Fun and Games. Press Your Luck and Card Sharks are the 2 newest additions, with the $100,000 Pyramid currently airing its 4th season. Now, as someone who's worked on these classic game shows over 30 years ago, do you like this current surge of game show revivals? And is it a thrill for you to see the new generation being introduced to these game show classics?
Yes, no question about that. ABC is going to have 6 game shows on this summer in prime time, which you'd have to go back more than 40 years to find a primetime schedule that had 6 game shows on, just on one network, by the way, not to mention the game shows that are going to be on the other broadcast networks. So this is a true renaissance for primetime game shows. And the 6 shows on ABC, all of them are revivals, and I've worked on all 6 of them at various times. So it's a particularly proud moment for me. I'm not involved in any of them directly, but I will go see all of them except the 2 that are in New York probably. And I think it's one of the best things to happen to television. Right now it's a summer romance with a little fling in the winter and an occasional show that makes it on in the fall and stays the whole year. But boy, the summers, I am so busy watching these game shows. There's a wonderful man named Rob Mills, who is the executive in charge of all reality, non-scripted alternative programming at ABC. He's been there many years, and it is all because of Rob that this revival has taken hold. He is a big game show fan. He really, really knows his stuff. He doesn't look at these just as old titles. He looks at them as fresh ways to revive great gameplay. And his work is brilliant, and he, I think, has done an enormously big service to the people like me who love game shows. And on top of that, Celebrity Family Feud and Card Sharks and Press Your Luck are all taping at CBS Television City, although it's not CBS anymore. They're taping in the original building where they all taped the CBS version. So to visit there and see those shows again is such a thrill.
And another one of ABC's game show revivals is Match Game, which is currently hosted by Alec Baldwin. But back in 1990, at the tail end of a nearly 20-year game show daytime dominance, ABC revived Match Game for daytime with host Ross Schaefer. And you had the chance to work on that show, right?
I did, yes. Game shows went through a bit of a slump in the late 80s. The network daytime lineups were crumbling. The time periods that had previously all been network-driven with programming, many of them were given back to the local stations. So the amount of available landscape for game shows was slowly going away. And in 1990, there was this rush of new game shows in syndication. There were 5 game shows that came out that year in syndication. None of them succeeded. But at the same time, I was at ABC at the time working again for Michael Brockman. After having left CBS and going to work for Dan Enright, I came back to reunite with Mr. Brockman at ABC, and we did a whole slew of pilots to try to find a show to play at noon, which was a time period that was withering away. The clearance of that time period was slowly diminishing, but we still had one more shot to put a show in there, and we settled on Match Game. The pilot was done with Bert Convy. Shortly after the pilot, Bert Convy took ill and was unable to host the series, but we got Ross Schaefer to do it, and it was on, I think, about a year. And that was a blast, a great classic show. That was really fun.
And what was really cool about Match Game 90 was that Charles Nelson Riley returned as a regular panelist. When you were putting the show together, did the production team reach out to Charles, and was there an immediate yes from him that he'd come back?
I'm not sure exactly how that happened, but my best guess is that Jonathan Goodson, Mark Goodson's son, who was running Match Game at the time, reached out to Charles, and it was an automatic yes. I believe that he felt so identified with that show and enjoyed it so much. I can't imagine that the answer wasn't anything other than an immediate yes.
And although she wasn't a regular panelist, Brett Summers did appear on a few episodes throughout the Match Game 90 run. I'm sure it must have been such a thrill for you, being such a big fan of the original show, to see Brett and Charles sitting together on a Match Game set again, right?
Yes. I believe she did 2 weeks with some time in between, and she was older at that time and not as robust as in the past. So it didn't quite have the same magic that they had together on the Gene Rayburn version, but it was still pretty special to see them together, yeah.
4 years later, on December 1st, 1994, Game Show Network debuted. And as a longtime avid game show fan, what was your reaction to hearing that a whole entire channel was getting devoted to just game shows?
Well, not only did I hear about it, I got to be a part of it, which was an amazing, amazing break for me. It all started with a man named Dick Block. Dick Block was a respected consultant at the time and worked very closely with the folks who were running Sony Television, including a gentleman named Mel Harris, who's since passed away, and Andy Kaplan, who was at Sony for, I think, 29 years and just left last year. And the two of them decided that they wanted to go after game show libraries and build a cable network that was devoted to game shows. So they bought the Bob Stewart Library. They bought the Merv Griffin Library, which was primarily Wheel and Jeopardy. And they bought the Chuck Barris Library. So between those three, they had quite a lot of titles and intellectual property and episodes that could be used to feed into a game show network. Then the missing piece was the Mark Goodson Library, which at the time was owned by All American Television, which became Pearson, which became Fremantle. And they couldn't buy that library, but they were able to make a deal with that company to run the majority of the library, whatever existed that was clearable. So between all of that, they had enough product to go on the air with a really strong network lineup of classic shows. So Dick Block called me. Actually, Mark Summers, a dear friend, set me up to talk to Dick Block. And Dick Block called me and said, hey, we're going to start up this game show channel, as it was called at the time. So I got hired initially as a consultant, and worked there for about a year or two on that. And then it kind of slowed down for a little bit, and I went to work for Jonathan Goodson at Mark Goodson Productions. I helped launch their lottery game show business, which became a big business for that company. I was in charge of their first show, which was called Illinois Instant Riches. It was on WGN TV nationally. Then one day I got a call from the gentleman who was now in charge of the new game show network, as it was later called. And he said, hey, we're going to launch this thing, and we want you to come over and work in programming. So I left Goodson to help launch the game show network, and I was there several months before the launch, helped put together the programming lineup and 2 live daily shows that we did, which were wraparound shows that were commentary on the game shows that aired on the network, and also we had some live gameplay. We had a morning show called Club AM with Steve Day and Laura Chambers, and we had an evening show called Prime Games with the late Peter Tamarkin. So on December 1st, 1994, at 4 p.m. Pacific time, we pressed the button and the network went on the air. I was right there in the heart of it in their headquarters in Culver City.
And there's another reason how you have influenced me sitting here today, because if it wasn't for the Game Show Network, I might not have been as knowledgeable or as passionate about the game show industry.
Well, I'm happy to have provided that for you.
So one of, if not my favorite GSN programs that ever aired was the Pressure Luck documentary titled Big Bucks, The Pressure Luck Scandal, in which you were the executive in charge for. Now, the documentary was about Michael Larson, the man who memorized the light pattern on the Pressure Luck game board in 1984 and won $110,237 because of it. I know this was a passion project for you, so why was it important for you to tell this story?
Well, just to bring you up to that point, I left Game Show Network after the first year of its existence and went on and worked several other places, and then was recruited to come back in 2001. And now I was in charge of programming for the network. And when I got there, my boss, Rich Cronin, said, we're open to any ideas that you think are going to connect with our audience and help grow our audience. And I knew who the audience was because I was part of it. I was definitely straight in the target of their demo profile. So I had been at CBS when the Press Your Luck scandal occurred. I was not on the stage that day. I was the exec on the show, but I was not there that day. I was at home. But as the day wore on, I was getting communications from people who were there, including Michael Brockman, my boss, that something crazy was going on at the set. So the next day, the Monday, I got the full download of what had happened that Sunday. And the basic story is that there was a contestant named Michael Larson who had done what was considered to be the impossible. He memorized the patterns of the bouncing lights on the Press Your Luck board, which, given the technology at the time, were not actually random patterns. They were set patterns, but there were 5 different ones. And he, through a series of viewing experiences that lasted several months, he took very careful notes on where the lights bounced from square to square on this board and memorized the 5 patterns. So he comes out to the show, gets on, and all of a sudden he starts hitting the best squares on the board time after time after time. So he wound up with $110,000+ on a show that retired people when they hit $25,000. And at the time, everyone was just blown away with his performance and his stamina and his consistency. So CBS had a dilemma because he didn't actually break any rules. Upon review, everyone realized that he didn't do anything wrong. He was just smarter than we were. So he beat the board. He beat the show. He won a lot of money as a result of it. And that episode was so long that they had to split it up into 2 halves and run it over 2 days because it couldn't fit into a half-hour slot. So CBS aired part 1 on a Friday and part 2 on the following Monday. And then the show never aired again. the reruns of Press Your Luck were sold, but those two shows were not in the package of reruns. So those shows had never been seen since 1985 when they originally aired that one time. So here I am, 2001. I started Game Show Network on September 10th, by the way. The next day, the world almost came to an end. And they said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, there's a story that really needs to be told. And it so happened that the network had just acquired the rerun rights to Press Your Luck. And the deal wasn't signed yet. So I asked the business affairs attorney at GSN to look at the deal. And I read through the deal, and it said the network is entitled to air all episodes of the show except episode 188 A and B. And I knew what episode 188 A and B were because I remembered those numbers from when I was at CBS, and I knew those were the Larson episodes. So I told the business affairs gentleman, I said, you need to go back and cross that out and make sure we get the rights to those episodes. So sure enough, he revised the contract. It got signed. I don't think anybody on the Fremantle side, or it was probably still Pearson at the time, realized that those were special episodes. So we now had the broadcast rights to those episodes. So I said, we've got to do a special to tell that story that had never been told. Perhaps one of the most unique stories in the history of game shows, if not television. So he agreed to that. We worked out a deal with Fremantle to get the clip rights to integrate the clips from the show into this 2-hour special that we produced with an outside production company, Termite Art. And we aired this 2-hour special, which was, in my opinion, one of the best things I've ever done. It was a real analysis of how Michael Larson, one, how he studied. He had passed away by that time, so we didn't get to talk to him, but we spoke extensively to his brother, and we did a full forensic analysis of the board patterns and how Michael did what he did. So the show aired in 2003, and it went through the roof. It really helped put Game Show Network on the map. And for the next 9 years, that show stood as the highest-rated show in the history of the network. So I'm very, very proud of that show. And on top of that, we were in production on a new version of Press Your Luck at the time called Whammy. And I said, let's do a reunion show with Michael's brother representing him and the two original opponents. And sure enough, we did a full episode of Whammy with those three players, recreating the competition that had taken place in 1985. And spoiler alert, Michael's brother won. Now, by this time, the technology had advanced to a point where the patterns on the board truly were random. So there was no possible way that anyone could beat the system or memorize the patterns. But it was great television, and that was the icing on the cake for me to tell that story.
The Michael Larson reunion Whammy episode is one of my favorite game show episodes of all time. And one of my favorite moments during the episode was in the first round when James Larson hits Big Bank on his second spin, and Ed Long says to Todd Newton, "I've seen this before." And Michael's brother actually won the game with just one prize after he just hit a whammy. I remember it was a digital grand piano worth over $6,000, and that was enough to keep the Larson legacy alive. Brad fact! And still, to this day, when I watch pre-Michael Larson Press Your Luck episodes, I look for the 212-194 light pattern because that was the main one Michael used to hit the 5,000 in a spin, or 4,000 in a spin, or 3,000 in a spin. Brad fact! And when I watch the show with my friends, I always tell them about how Michael was able to figure out the board, and I show them the patterns, and that squares 4 and 9 never had a whammy. So for me, Michael's story is still part of my life.
It was a great story that needed to be told, and I'm very proud that I got to tell it.
So going back a couple of years, let's talk a little bit about Greed, because the first time I ever watched Greed, when they re-aired it on GSN, I was so mesmerized by, the set and the idea of, wow, $2 million. So this was around the time where the big primetime game show boom occurred with Who Wants to Be a Millionaire on ABC in 1999. So shortly after, in November, Greed came on, and you were behind the creation of that, correct?
Yes, it was a wonderful story in my career. Who Wants to Be a Millionaire came on in August of 99. And within 3 days, it had established itself as a hit. And by the end of the first week, it was a monster hit. It really captivated America. And it had been, for the most part, the first primetime game show in almost 4 decades. So Dick Clarke, a very smart man who was keenly aware of industry trends and was a visionary in many ways, he realized that Millionaire was going to be a monster hit. And his son, Rack Clarke, who worked with him, called me on that Wednesday, on the third day of Millionaire. And he said, Dad believes that there's going to be a rush of game shows that are going to go on the other broadcast networks because of the success of Millionaire. And he wants you to create something and bring it to us, and we'll go out and sell it with you. Well, what a dream call that was. So I put on my thinking cap. I knew that it had to be a big money show. I didn't want it to be exactly like Millionaire. So I created a game that had a team element to it. And 2 days later, on that Friday, I went in and pitched a show to Dick and his associates, including Rack and Barry Edelman. And the show was called All for One. All for One was a show which was about teamwork. There were 5 players who knew each other. They were coworkers or schoolmates or neighbors, or there was some affinity between the 5 people. And they had to agree on a series of answers. The show Divided, that was on GSN briefly a couple years ago, still repeats in the middle of the night. It felt a little bit like that in my eyes. It was about having to have a consensus and making people convince other people that answers were right. So I pitched that idea to Dick and his associates, and they said, this is really good. We like the team element, but it needs to be a little more combative. Mike Darnell, who we were ultimately going to sell the show to at Fox, he was all about conflict and all about heightening the excitement and giving something that was highly, highly promotable to the viewer. So they wanted me to hype it up a little bit. He suggested that the teammates not know each other, that they be strangers. So I reworked the show over the weekend, brought it back in on Monday, and it was now an individual play game, but it was still a team. So they were working together up till a point, but then they could ultimately decide whether to quit or continue individually after a certain point on the money ladder. So Dick and his people liked that. We brought that in to NBC the next day, Tuesday. We met with a wonderful man named Rick Ludwin, who was in charge of all variety and late night specials. There was no reality department at the time. And Rick said, this is a great idea, but we own the rights to 21. So if we're going to do a big money game show at NBC, it's going to be 21. So he passed. And the next day, Wednesday, we brought it in to see Mike Darnell at Fox. And Mike jumped up and down, literally. He's known to be very excitable in a meeting when he likes a show idea. And he was like, this is great. I love this. I love this. I love this. I love this. We have to get this on the air. But you got to add another element where the people can steal each other's money. And we thought about it and said, wow, that's mean. That's something that had never been done before. But he wanted it, and he's the network, so whatever the network wants, the network gets. So we went back to the office. We redeveloped the show again. We needed a title that had more bite to it than All for One. That was a little soft. And we were brainstorming titles in the office one day, and someone said, well, what's the core behavior on this show? And I said, well, it's really greed. And, you know, greed has been a foundation principle of many game shows over time, but nothing had ever been called greed. And it was sort of the elephant in the room, if you will, because many game shows were built on greed, but none of them had that in the title. So we batted around some ideas, and I remember saying, what about the greedy team, the greedy bunch, the greedy group? And Dick Clarke said, wait a minute, we're missing it. Let's just call it Greed. And that became the light bulb moment. We changed the name to Greed. We looked at this stealing element that Mike wanted, and we decided to have a random device that would land on one player at various points in the game and allow that player to choose one of his or her teammates to go up against head-to-head, and whoever survived that one-question challenge would steal the other's money and be playing for an additional amount than the other teammates were. So the best part of that was the name that we came up with for that piece was The Terminator. So we went back into Fox. We showed Mike the new format with The Terminator and the title Greed, and he said, this is it. This is going to go on the air. You guys do a pilot right away, and we're going to get this on as soon as we can. And then he said, you know what? There's no time for a pilot. We knew at that point that Millionaire was going to come back on the air in November because it had been such a huge hit. And he said, we have to beat them on the air. So he asked us to do a presentation for his boss, Doug Herzog. We showed the show to him, and he loved it. And he said, let's do this. And we then rushed like madmen to get this show launched. And 9 weeks and a day after we pitched it to Mike, it went on the air. It was called Greed. It went on November 4th, 1999. We're about to have the 20th anniversary of it this year. And Chuck Woolery hosted it. And we were, in some ways, derivative of Millionaire. We had similar lighting patterns, similar music cues, a lot of very drawn-out drama. But we were different in a couple of ways. Our top prize was $2 million because $1 million wasn't enough for Mike Darno. And it was a team game for the first 4 questions. So the team worked together to answer multiple part questions up until the $100,000 level. And then basically the team had to come up with one set of answers, and the captain of the team had the right to change one answer going up the ladder to the $200,000 question, the $500,000 question, the $1 million question, and the $2 million question. And the number of choices increased for each question, so presumably it got harder. And after every question in that second half, we had a terminator to eliminate a team member, and we had the ability for each player to decide whether they were going to continue or not. So those were all new elements. Standards and practices at Fox felt that the Terminator was too mean, so we made it a choice where the player didn't have to pick somebody, but we wanted them to pick someone, or you didn't have that moment. So we convinced Standards and Practices to allow us to bribe the contestant with a $10,000 prize if they chose to go head-to-head against one of their teammates. And they allowed that, and virtually every time the Terminator landed, the player took the bribe and elected to go head-to-head with a teammate who became an opponent. So it did fairly well, had a strong premiere, and we had shot 6 half-hour episodes because Millionaire, for the most part, in its August run, was a half-hour show. So we were planning to be a half-hour show as well. But Mike, because he's all about hype and promotion, he told us to go on the air that first night with a 2-hour special. So we said, okay, but you have now used up 2/3 of the inventory that we have shot and edited. So if this series is going to continue, we're going to need to shoot more episodes pronto because there's only 1 hour left of material. And if you're going to go to an hour format, because Millionaire was essentially going to an hour format, you've got to have more episodes in the can. So we got to pick up for more episodes before we even went on the air so that if the series should succeed, we would have enough in the bank to continue to air it. So we got an order for 6 more hours, and then the show continued to do well. And then we got an order for 6 more hours, and then ultimately another order for 13 hours. And we did a total of 44 and a half episodes. We did a half hour, That 70s Greed, which was a companion to That 70s show that we aired one night on Fox. So we did 44-hour episodes and 1 half hour. If we had had more time to develop it, it probably could have been even better. But there was a change in management at Fox, and the new person who came in just didn't like game shows. We were still doing fairly well on Friday nights, but she just didn't care for game shows, so we were a victim of that.
Did you ever think you'd give out the $2 million prize?
Well, we hoped we would give out the $2 million prize. We did ultimately give out a $2 million prize, but it was during a promotion we did in the May sweeps of our one broadcast year, where we actually doubled the money values, and we did Super Greed with a top prize of $4 million. And on one of those episodes, we did give away $2 million. And then we gave away $1 million a couple of times, including to one individual player named Curtis Warren. He was a fun contestant who had spiky hair and a really nice guy, very smart. We almost gave away the $2 million on our second episode. We had a contestant named Dan Avila, who was the only surviving member from the team. Everyone else had quit and taken their money, but he decided to play on. So he went to the top of the ladder, and he was playing for $2 million. It was actually $2,200,000 because we had a gimmick where we would add $100,000 to the top prize every time it wasn't won. So he was playing for $2.2 million. And his question was about the most recognizable odors, according to his survey. And he missed on the last answer and left with nothing. He was a courageous soul and an incredible promotional device for our show in its earliest days. That was pretty spectacular.
Lastly, I want to talk about The Chase, which is one of GSN's biggest and most successful game show originals in its history. However, what many people might not know is that there were 2 pilots of The Chase filmed for Fox over in England, where the show originated, with Mark Labette, the Beast, as the chaser for one pilot, and Jeopardy super champion Brad Rutter as the other chaser. Brad fact! Why don't you talk about how those pilots came to be and how The Chase eventually found its way onto GSN?
I got a call from ITV, which owned the format, and they had sold a pilot of the show to Fox. Mike Darnell was still there, and he was a fan of mine. So they approved me to produce the pilot for Mike for Fox. We decided to do it in England on their set because it was cheaper than building a set because the set needed to be pretty massive. So we went over to England. They did their regular afternoon show on a pretty small set without an audience. But they also had a celebrity version, which was a much larger set, and that was done in front of an audience. So we coordinated with the folks in England to shoot our pilot on their larger celebrity set. I went over there with Brad Rutter, who was my choice to be the American chaser. And then we also did a pilot with Mark Labette, the Beast, who wound up being the chaser on the GSN version. We brought in 8 contestants, 4 of whom appeared in each of the 2 pilots we shot, one with Mark and one with Brad. And we delivered the show to Fox. We're very proud of it. It was, I think, one of the best shows I've ever worked on. And Fox was very intrigued by it, but lo and behold, Mike Darnell left the network. So ultimately, Fox passed, and GSN had been stalking this show. They wanted it badly. And I would get calls from them on an almost weekly basis saying, when is the option up at Fox? Because we're interested. And I kept pushing them back because Fox kept renewing the option because they didn't want to let it go, but they weren't ready to press the button. Then when Mike left, we got it back at ITV. And the next day, GSN called ITV and made a deal to do the show for them. So we were in production for the first season was 8 episodes. And for GSN at the time, this was a pretty big gamble. They had done a couple of big shows in the past, but this was a very expensive show, particularly because of the potential prize money, which was theoretically unlimited. And they commissioned 8 episodes. We shot them and started to edit them. And then we got a call saying, you're picked up for a second season. And we're like, wait a minute, we haven't even delivered the first episode, and you're already picking us up for a second season. And they said, yes, we like what you did so much. We believe in this, so let's do 8 more. And the 8 turned into 9. And then the show went on the air and did very, very well for them. And they ran the first season, waited a bit, ran the second season, and then they picked up a third season, which became 14 more episodes. And we did those. And then they picked up a 4th season, which was 20 episodes. So overall, we had 51 episodes for this 4-year run. And Mark Labette was the chaser on all the episodes. They wanted only him. And so we, of course, gave the network what they wanted. And we remained one of the highest rated shows in the history of the network. I believe it's still the most enduring original show in terms of audience delivery in the history of the network. It still runs every day at 3 o'clock Eastern. Even though we only shot 51 episodes and we shut down about 5 years ago, they're still running those episodes every day.
And another Brad fact. The largest solo money winner on The Chase USA was a man by the name of Raj Dwalia. He won $125,000 by defeating the Beast, but he was a contestant on the Mark Labette pilot episode.
Yes, he was. And we had 5 contestants on the pilots who we liked so much that we wanted to bring them back and do the series. And for whatever reason, at the time, GSN said, no, we don't want the pilot contestants to be on the series. I'm not sure if it was they thought that they might have an advantage over the other contestants because they already knew the show and had been on it. They didn't win any money on the pilot because the pilot was not for broadcast, so they just got paid a flat fee. So we just kept going back and hounding them to allow us to put our favorite people from the pilot back on the show. And they finally relented in season 2. So we got to put Raj on, and Raj is brilliant. I believe that Raj actually outranks the Beast in the standings for these national trivia contests that take place every year. So we knew Raj was a superstar, and the Beast knew Raj was a superstar. And sure enough, Raj became the only surviving player in that episode. So whatever money was in the bank would go only to him if he could beat the Beast, and he did. And he won $125,000, which for GSN was an astonishing win, the most money they had ever given to a single contestant. And he did it with great ease. We never had that big a win again on the show. We did have a $180,000 win later, but that was split among 3 people. So you had huge amounts of money on the board on most of the episodes, and that was great for GSN because their budgets are not as high as broadcast network budgets. So they couldn't afford to give away huge amounts of money, but the way the Chase is built, you could have that amount at stake and not give it away most of the time. So you're still benefiting from the excitement of a potential huge prize, but you don't have to give it away a lot. So that was one of the reasons I think that we endured and that we got as big an audience as we did.
How were the Chase offers determined? Because I'm presuming Mark didn't make up the cash amounts by himself. Were they determined solely by the contestants' performance in the cash builder? Were they based on heightening the drama throughout the game with bigger offers?
Well, it was a rough formula, but it was not a locked-in formula. We looked at their performance. We looked at their potential to challenge the Beast. We had a sense as to whether the players would go up against him and take the high offer. So the producers would craft an offer that we would think would cause drama in the contestant as to whether they wanted to gamble their participation on the show by going up to the high amount and challenging the Beast 1 degree higher. So we would feed that information to Mark, and then he would reveal it.
Where did the idea for the super offer come from?
Well, season 4, we had a 20-episode order, and we wanted to come up with a gimmick that would make the show more promotable and add layers of drama that we hadn't previously had. So with the permission of our partners from the UK who didn't have that element in their show, we tried out a couple of times, I think we did it 3 times, an offer that was even higher than the high offer, usually significantly higher. And that was basically a no mistake choice. So if you chose the super offer, you could not get any questions wrong that the Beast got right, or you would be out of the game. So that was an enormous gamble. And none of the players ever took the super offer. But, man, did it create a lot of tension and a lot of drama when we put that up there.
Quickly going back to when you said GSN wanted Mark Labette to be the sole chaser for the series, were there other people in mind to be the chasers for the GSN version of The Chase? And when you were pitching the show to GSN, did you want a rotation of chasers?
I believe that ITV did want a rotating panel because that had worked so well for them in England and still does to this day, by the way. So I think it was GSN just getting their way. They said, we love Mark. He's a character. He's enormously large in height and weight, And they were so caught up by him, they said, we want him to be essentially the star of the show, not taking anything away from Brooke Burns, who was one of the most amazing hosts I've ever worked with and a delightful, delightful human being. But they liked the 1-2 punch of Brooke and Mark. They liked the relationship between them. In England, the relationship between Bradley Walsh, the host, and Mark Labette, when he's on that show, is more of sort of pals. They have a sort of a bromance going on that they tease each other and tantalize each other and have some fun with their adversarial relationship. But here, GSN loved the idea of Beauty and the Beast, and they really liked the repartee that Brooke and Mark had established. So they just didn't want to give that up. And I think it made for great television.
Well, it certainly did, because The Chase was actually nominated for a Daytime Emmy Award for Outstanding Game Show in 2014. I'm sure that was a delight to find out that you were nominated.
Yes. To this day, it's my only Emmy nomination. I had been involved with the Television Academy for many, many years, decades, in fact. I'm still involved with the West Coast Academy. I'm on the Board of Governors of the Television Academy in L.A. So I was very close to the people who ran the Emmy contest on both coasts. And to actually be a nominee one year was an unbelievable thrill. I remember getting up at 6 a.m. the day that the nominations were announced and going quickly to the website and looking it up, and I noticed our show was on it. And I ran in and woke up my wife, and I said, guess what? I'm an Emmy nominee. And it was a wonderful moment. It was something I'm very proud of.
Finally, is there any chance that you think The Chase will ever come back? Because I would love to see new episodes.
I would love to see new episodes, too. A lot of decisions that are made these days are budgetary. It was an expensive show, and as well as it did, I think the formula that GSN has adopted in their new management now is to do more efficient production, to do the strip shows that they're doing. Strip meaning every day of the week, 5 days a week of new episodes. Those shows are much more cost-effective than The Chase was. So never say never. I know that ITV is very proud of the show and would love to get it on somewhere, someday, but I don't believe there are any solid plans for that to happen right away.
Well, I'll be crossing my fingers, hoping The Chase will be back in America one day, sooner than later, and that you will finally win the Emmy Award that you deserve.
Oh, thank you so much. That means a lot to me. I would love an Emmy. Unless you're on a legacy show like Jeopardy or Price is Right, it's pretty hard, honestly. I mean, there were a couple of years when Cash Cab won the Emmy, which was a quirky little thing, but pretty much you can bet your money every year it's going to be Price is Right or Jeopardy. So since I don't work on those shows, I think it's unlikely that I'll win an Emmy, but I'm thrilled to be nominated. I know that's an often used cliche, but I was thrilled to be nominated, and I will always be proud of my work on The Chase, and I'm glad it's still running and doing well.
Well, Bob, we have reached my favorite portion of the game show, where I create an original game for my special guest to play on the air. It is time for the game of the day.
Game of the day.
And if you recall, Bob, at the top of the show, I gave you a tease to what the game of the day would entail, and I said that it was going to be a 2-for-1 revival. Well, the reason I said that was because, Bob, you'll be playing a game I like to call Game Show Mashup. Game Show Mashup.
Okay.
And the reason it's called Game Show Mashup is because I have combined elements of 2 game shows that you have worked on into a single game. And like I mentioned earlier, these 2 game shows are the newest additions to ABC's Summer Fun and Games Game Show Revival lineup. Bob, you're about to play a game show mashup consisting of Card Sharks and Press Your Luck.
All right. Very exciting.
Bet you never thought Press Your Luck would end up on the radio.
It's not much of a game for radio, but if anyone could pull it off, you can.
Well, I hope I don't disappoint your expectations of me. So without further ado, here's how Game Show Mashup works. The game is divided into 2 rounds, and at the start of both rounds, you'll play the ever-popular Card Sharks bonus round game, the Money Cards. Your goal is to accumulate as many points as you can playing the money cards because those points will earn you additional picks at the Pressure Luck board. For both rounds, I will give you 3 picks for free, and for every 2,000 points earned in the money cards, you'll earn an additional pick, up to a total of 9, making 12 overall picks available for each round. The second part of both rounds features the Pressure Luck board, which contains 18 different cards, just like 18 squares on the real show. On the back of 15 cards are point values, some of which also contain an additional pick. However, on the back of 3 of the cards is a whammy. If you hit the whammy, you lose all the points you have accumulated up to that pick, and if you hit all 3 whammies in a single round, that round is over. However, at any time during the first round, you may freeze and protect the points you have earned, but the round will end right then and there, and any remaining picks will be forfeited. Those points that you froze will then carry over to the next round, and by the end of the second round, if you can accumulate 12,000 or more Pressure Luck points, you will be deemed a winner. So those are all the rules that you need to know, Bob. Are you ready to play?
I am ready to play.
Then let's play Game Show Mashup. So we're going to begin with round 1, and for the money cards, as you know, I'll start you off with 200 points, and it's your job to bet your way across the bottom line of 4 cards, predicting if the next card is higher or lower than the one preceding it. When we get to the second line, I'll give you an additional 400 points and 3 more cards to bet your points with. Minimum bets are 50 points until you get to the top card, the big bet, where you must wager at least half of your points. In addition, you can change 1 card per line by using any one of the 3 spare cards I am also dealing out. All right, remember, every 2,000 points you end the money card segment with, you will earn an additional pick at the Pressure Luck board. The cards have been shuffled, cut, and dealt. So, Bob, here we go with the money cards. I'll give you 200 points. And here comes your first card. It is a 5. How many points you want to bet on that 5? Or, of course, you can change the card as well.
Okay, let's go 100 higher.
100 points higher than a 5. Ooh, a 2. That's okay. You lost 100, but you have a deuce.
Well, let's go all of it higher.
All of it higher. It's a 9.
Let's change that.
1, 2, or 3.
Number 2.
Number 2. The 9 is now an ace.
All of it lower.
All of it lower than an ace. It's an 8.
Ooh.
You now have 400 points, but the 8 now gets moved up to the second line where I give you another 400 points. So you now have 800 points and you can change the card.
Let's change that, please.
1 or 3?
1.
Number 1. The 8 is now a deuce.
All right. All of it higher.
All of it higher than a 2. A 5. You have 1,600 points.
600 higher.
600 points higher than a 5. Ooh, a 3. But that's okay. You have a 3 and 1,000.
Let's go all of it higher.
All of it higher than a 3. An ace! An ace! And we're going to move the ace up to the big bet. You have 2,000 points. What are you going to do?
Well, you know what I'm going to do. All of it lower.
For 4,000 points, meaning 2 extra picks at the Pressure Luck board, it's a 9. You got it.
Yay!
With those 2 bonus picks, you now have a total of 5 picks for this round of Pressure Luck. Remember, for Pressure Luck, there are 18 cards, 3 of which have a whammy, and you need a total of 12,000 points to win. So, Bob, which number first?
7.
Number 7, and you stop on 1,000 points and a pick. So you have 1,000 points. You still have 5 picks. So which number would you like next?
All right, let's go 3.
Number 3, and you stop on 1,250 points. You now have 2,250 and 4 picks left. Now you can freeze and take those points into the next round, but those 4 picks will be forfeited. So Bob, do you want to press your luck or freeze?
I'm going to freeze.
You're going to freeze at 2,250?
Yep.
Okay. Those points will carry over to the next round, and we will play our second round of the money cards.
All right.
Now, the cards for both Card Sharks and Pressure Luck will be shuffled, so you have an equal chance to get everything again. And remember, you still need another 9,750 points in Pressure Luck to win. So the money cards have been shuffled, cut, and dealt once again. Here is 200 points, Bob. And your first card is a queen.
100. Now let's go all of it lower.
All of it lower. I like your style. It is a 10. You have 400.
100 lower.
100 points lower than a 10. It's a 3, and you have 500 points and a 3.
All of it higher.
That's what I like to hear. Oh, no, a 2!
Oh!
Oh, but that's okay. That is perfectly fine. You have a great card, and we're going to move you up. You still have 400 points.
All right. All of it higher.
All of it higher. It's a queen, and you have 800 points.
All of it lower.
All of it lower than a queen. A 7! And you can change the card if you'd like.
Let's change it.
1, 2, or 3.
2.
Number 2, the 7 with 1,600 points is now a 5.
600 higher.
600 points higher than a 5. A 10! You have 2,200. We're going to move the 10 up. You must bet at least 1,100, but you can change the card.
Let's go 1,800 lower.
1,800 points, lower than a 10. An 8! You got it!
Yay!
Those 4,000 points mean once again you have earned 2 additional picks for a total of 5. Impress your luck. And remember, you need 9,750 points to win the game.
All right.
Back to the Pressure Luck board. Keep in mind, you may pick the same numbers since all of the cards have been reshuffled. So, Bob, which number would you like to pick first?
Let's start with number 10.
Number 10. And, Bob, you stopped at 1,000 points and a pick. So you have 3,250 and 5 picks still. Which number next?
All right, let's do Lucky 13.
Lucky 13. Stop at 4,000 points and a pick. You now have 7,250 points, and you still have 5 picks. Remember, one card has 5,000 points and a pick, so if you get that card, you'll be a winner.
Okay, let's go 12.
Number 12. Let's see what that's worth. You stopped at 5,000 points and a pick. Bob, you got it. You just won this game of Game Show Mashup.
Yay! And no whammies. Thank you very much.
Well, congratulations, Bob, and thanks so much for playing Game Show Mashup.
Thank you.
Game Show Mashup. Well, Bob, this has been an absolute treat for me to talk with you today and to play that game with you. So thank you so much for joining me on this episode of The Game Show.
Thank you.
And like all of my guests, you have an open invitation to join me again whenever you'd like. And I know there is so much more we can talk about in the world of game shows. So hopefully in the near future, we can have another chat.
I would love to do that. You're a great host. You do your homework, and I love how big a fan you are of game shows.
Well, me being a big fan is thanks to people like you who make great game shows. All right, Bob, thank you again for joining me on the game show today, and I look forward to our next conversation.
I appreciate it, Bradley. Take care.
All right, thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Well, I can't believe I have to say this, but we have reached the end of another episode of The Game Show. I know, it's like the whammy just stole the time away from us.
Hasta luego, arrivederci, bon voyage, that means goodbye.
But my thanks again to Game Show super producer Bob Boden, aka TV Bob, for being my guest today. Now, if you're saying to yourself, gee, I'd sure like to binge listen to episodes of The Game Show right now. Or if you're saying to yourself, I want to check out this episode again, as well as the extended version of this episode, featuring additional audio clips and more conversation with Bob Boden, well, you're in luck because you can do all of what I just mentioned by logging on to www.soundcloud.com/Bradley_Clarke, that's BRADLEY_CLARKE/sets/The Game Show. That's www.soundcloud.com/Bradley_Clarke, that's BRADLEY_CLARKE/sets/The Game Show. Plus, don't forget to like The Game Show starring Bradley Clarke on Facebook and follow The Game Show starring Bradley Clarke on Twitter using the handle @TheGameShowBC and hashtag The Game Show. And of course, be sure to tune in next time for another exciting episode of The Talk Show, all about the world of television game and competition shows, The Game Show. I'm Bradley Clarke, the Bradster, and I've got to go get ready for my chase with the Beast. Mark Labette is going down. Bye for now.
This edition of The Game Show was created and produced by Bradley Clarke and was recorded at the WRHU studios. This is Austin Angelo speaking.
The Game Show is a Bradley Clarke production. Get your game on.